hope everybody's safe and sound.
Hey, Karl, great to see you, buddy.
Yeah, man.
It's
We are long distance.
Yes, we are. Karl, I'm going to read off some credits and stuff in a minute, but I've got to say, we went 40-some years without seeing each other. He was the first person I met at Criteria Studios. By the way, notice what I'm wearing today.
I love it. Yeah, mine faded. I don't know where it is.
Mac would be very proud.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'd gone like 40-some years without seeing each other, and exactly a year ago, they had a Criteria Studios reunion. I got invited and got to go back and see Karl again. That's when I first mentioned to him, hey, man, can I get you on one of my taxi TVs? And he very graciously said yes to that. So thank you for doing it. So let's see. Here's a short list of his credits. As a producer, engineer, nominated for Grammy for the Jekyll and Hyde album, nominated for Grammy for Woman in Love and Guilty for the album of the year, won a Grammy for Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, nominated for Staying Alive single, nominated for Grease, the original soundtrack album for Best Producer of the Year. Karl has engineered and or produced for artists like the Bee Gees, Eric Clapton, Barbra Streisand, Andy Gibb, Dr. John, who I know you loved, Frankie Valli, Samantha Sang, Dionne Warwick, Dolly Parton, Kenny Rogers, Olivia Newton-John, Diana Ross, Firefall, Mama's Pride, Ohio Players. It goes on, and has acted as a Broadway sound designer for shows like Jekyll and Hyde and the Scarlet Pimpernel and others. We've all had people in our lives. I think everybody can look at somebody in their past and go, this person changed my life. And Karl, you were one of those, one of like only two for me. So I'm just, I'm forever grateful, deeply grateful, and think about you more often than you would even believe, I think. But it's just, oops, wrong page there. So I want to tell a quick story, and then we'll get into the interview. But many years ago, I saw the Ed Sullivan Show when the Beatles walked on that stage. And when they walked off the stage, I was 9 years old. And I said to my parents, when I grow up, I want to make records. And they went, yeah, right. And I gave up on the dream because, getting a job in a studio, there were like 10 in the United States at the time. Anyway, I was at Ace Music in North Miami as a freshman in college, I believe, maybe a sophomore, with my roommate. And this guy was walking through the store, and he said, I got to take this piece of gear over to Criteria for stills. And I went, Criteria, the famous studio? Yeah. Stills as in Steven? Yeah. I said, can I go? No, absolutely not. It's a high security place, a lot of famous people. No. Well, I begged, I pleaded. He finally let me go. And he said, now you just sit in the lobby, keep your mouth shut, don't cause any trouble. And about 5 minutes later, this hippie-looking dude with long hair, that was you, and this older gentleman, about 50-something, Mac Emmerman, the owner and founder of Criteria, the two of you walked through the lobby, and Mac looked at something, goes, this place looks like crap. We need to hire a new intern, clean it up. Place looks like crap. So you guys disappeared down the hallway, I think, towards Studio A, and I went and asked Margaret at the front desk, was that the owner? Yeah. What's his name? Mac Emmerman. Well, actually, I stood up as you guys were walking. I said, I'll do it. And Mac said, who are you? You here with the Bee Gees? You here with Clapton? And he said, you need to leave. So you came back out into the parking lot where I was kind of thinking, okay, how can I get a job in this place? And you invited my roommate and me to go over to Studio C, and he took us in the control room. First time in my life I laid eyes on a real control room. You had just finished doing 461 Ocean Boulevard with Eric, and you played, might have been I Shot the Sheriff for us, something from that record, and then you played something from the Bee Gees because you had just done Main Course with Jive talking on it not too long before that. Seriously, that moment cemented the rest of my life because of your kindness and generosity and seeing this dopey kid with stars in his eyes, and you just took me in there, and you were like so chill, like, yeah, man, it's cool. Yeah, I get to do this for a living. Like, no ego, nothing. So thank you. Thank you for all of it, because without that moment, I wouldn't own this company. I wouldn't have had the career in the studio. Everything that happened from that day forward literally happened because you were kind enough to invite me in to go see that control room. So thank you.
Wonderful, Michael. Thank you. Thank you for your humility, too. And the other lesson that you just taught that everybody should observe is when opportunity knocks, by all means, especially the younger crowd, take it.
Yeah.
You only live once, and when your desire is to be in this industry, go for it. Because if you have to sleep on somebody's front couch, there's certain things that as a young person, if this is your dream, fulfill it. And you did. And that's fantastic. That's a great lesson for everybody who's listening.
Well, thank you. I've got to say, it was. I'm good at noticing opportunities. I'll be a little immodest about that, but even at that young age of 19 years old, I saw it. I went for it. But without your kindness, the opportunity wouldn't have gone anywhere. So just let's start.
I quit my good-paying job to go to work for Criteria.
Well, I was I wanted to do your.
I was fixing two-way radios, and I had an FCC first-class license, and I was allowed to do that. And my love of music, I had worked in a rock and roll club, in the old days on the World, and we're up at 3 a.m. with bands and it just doing live PAs and sound, and I was quitting my gig as a college student and as making a lot more money than Mac Emerman offered me in Criteria, and I went to work for Mac. I saw something that I believed in, and speaking of the Beatles, I mean, we were listening to pop music radio, and we waited for the latest Beatles record to come out. And I loved like R&B and soul, and I also loved pop and rhythmic music, any music. And it was like, yeah, go for it.
Didn't you start as a mastering engineer at Criteria?
Yeah, there was an opening, and just like cleaning the floors, right? There was an opening. Yeah, and there was an opening, and I found out about it, and I went in Mac's office, and I said, I have this and this and this technical capability. And he said, well, we always need another technician around here. And could you learn mastering? I said, I could probably learn. So inside of 2 weeks, I was doing all the mastering, right? So, I mean, it just happens that in those days, I started out technically. I knew transistors and circuits, and speakers and acoustics. I knew enough about the technical aspects of recording, and he understood that, and that was my gig for a couple of years, doing mastering and assisting, the other guys in the studio with the Atlantic Records projects.
How old were you at the time when you started the mastering gig there?
Oh, I guess I was early 20, maybe.
Okay.
21, somewhere in there.
So a young kid.
I had, a couple of years of college under my belt. So,
When you were little, 5, 10 years old, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, I really liked playing music, but I picked up a guitar. And I realized pretty quickly this was not for me. The neuron connections between the brain and the fingers is too long a distance to travel. So, I could hear it, but my fingers would never go there. I said, forget it. So, but I still loved music. I was going to be a pencil pusher for IBM, or, I was studying engineering, real engineering, transistors and circuits.
As opposed to audio.
Right. No, really, a geek, thinking, whatever. But substantial algebra, is involved. And I realized, that my senses were musical senses, and not necessarily, gee, I could do the calculus on the passive resistance of transistor circuits or silicon or whatever. So, you could do that mathematics, and yet my soul felt better, in a musical environment.
I do remember. I think I've got questions about this later, but I'm going to bring it up now because Karl's incredibly smart. I don't want to embarrass him, but he is like probably genius level smart. And I always marveled at the fact that you had great musical sensibilities. And you also had I remember walking into Control Room A one time, and just so everybody knows, back in the day, we didn't have consoles with channel strips. You had one giant sheet of like 1/4-inch thick aluminum with all this stuff screwed into it and soldered onto it. And to service the console, you had to lift it up like the hood of a car and crawl in the belly pan of this thing on your back with glasses on and a soldering iron. I walk in the control room and I see a pair of knees and feet and sneakers hanging out of the belly pan. Like, what the hell is going on here? And it was Karl, and I said, what are you doing? First of all, the thing was propped up with a 2x4, so if he accidentally moved a leg, he would have had his face smashed with 200 pounds of cabling and solder and faders. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I realized the console sounds like a little fat. I think I needed to change the value of these resistors from like 200 ohms to 500 ohms or something like that. And I was just so impressed as a young guy that, wow, I'm never going to make it in this industry because I don't know crap about resistors. I mean, I know they have colored bands on them. So I thought that in order to grow up and be a real audio engineer that you needed to know this stuff. But no, you were really the only one among us, other than your brother Brad, who worked in the shop, and Jack Davis, who was the head tech. But you were the only fader pushing engineer that understood where the electrons went and why. So
yeah. I mean, it's sort of like being a race car driver, but still knowing how to fix an engine, I guess. Yeah. I mean, the idea was that working with musicians, though, and bands, and speaking musical language, and Albie helped me out a lot, my partner, Albie Galut. But the idea is that, once you learn the nomenclature, you learn the language that people are talking about. And then you connect your ear to what the language is. And you go, oh, that's a minor chord. And you hear that, and then you also hear harmony, and then you hear pieces of music that tell you stories, and then you go back and listen to the projects that you've worked on, or your favorite records at the time, Buddy Holly and the Crickets or whatever it was, and you recall, why did I feel that way about that emotional song, and and it was such a chord inversion, and it was just a transition in music, and you go, that made me take note of that. So, learning how to engineer and communicate with musicians and producers and other engineers was learning the vernacular and also being able to have a smooth time of it. I mean, I remember that, none of my sessions would we ever have any confrontational energy. It was always smooth. It was always about what do we need to get from here to there. So, you didn't criticize the drummer for doing something. You would say, if you put some more energy into that, maybe, we could get from here to there. And, it's about communication. As a matter of fact, that's what music is anyway. We're communicating from an artist who has a vision to a listener who wants to grab that vision. So that's what we do. We communicate.
You'll laugh. As we go down the list, I think I know you better than I thought you did, or than either of us thought I might, because many of my questions you just covered in there, because it was always so obvious to me. I actually wrote a question that said, I never saw you get flustered, intense, or upset in the studio. You were always super laid back and very professional. You could have easily worn the shirt that said, I got this, yet you were never egotistical or cocky about it. So how important is one's persona in helping your studio career, or just, I guess, career in the music business? How important is your persona in making your dreams come true? It sounds like personality had a lot to do with it.
Absolutely, because you're in a studio situation with, not a lot of other people. And so individual communication is important. And the idea is that, humility works too. Just tell the truth. I mean, if you don't understand what it's supposed to sound like, ask the people you're recording. I mean, I remember one time I was doing the Memphis Horns project in Studio A, and they had recorded some, I guess, Delaney and Bonnie in Studio B or something like that. And, you know, the Memphis Horns is a very famous horn section.
Yeah.
They flew them in from Memphis, and, you know, it's got a lot of, I mean, punch and soul and everything like that. So I'm sitting behind the console in Studio A, and I go, you know, why don't you, and I had a bunch of microphones, and I put them out and recorded, you know, Andrew Love on trombone or whatever. And I said to the guys, I said, come on in the control room and tell me what I'm doing. Because I didn't know how to record those horns. And they said, you know, and the trumpet player was very impressed. He goes, oh, this is the way it's supposed to be. And I said, yeah, I need to learn what you guys want to sound like. And that became part of the communication, because I'm just telling the truth. If I don't know, just be honest and say, listen, this, you know, it's not a complicated thing. It's not, in fact, the easiest way out.
You're incredibly honest, but I mean, you're unlike any other person I've ever met in my life, quite frankly. Especially, I mean, you're an odd duck in the best possible sense. You've got this like nuclear facility going on in your head, but your external thing is like, hey, man, how's it going? You know, you're very laid back. As a matter of fact, we have a mutual friend named Margie Curry, who was like the scheduling lady at Criteria when we both worked there.
Yeah.
And Margie once made a comment to me. You walked out of the office. I was still in there. And she said, he's so laid back, I'm not even sure how he gets his shoes on the right feet in the morning. Actually, did you look at his feet? Because I'm not sure he had his shoes on the right feet.
Yeah, I think my approach at that time was I was doing something that I was very happy doing. And they wanted to pay me good money to do it. So, you know, I got the keys to Criteria. And, you know, I thought, not that I had made it, I thought, you know, how comfortable can it get? And of course, you know, then you know, Albie and I formed a team. I, you know, started hanging out with Tommy Dowd and, you know, the Atlantic Records team and Arif Mardin. And the idea was I learned more from Jerry Wexler and Tom Dowd and Arif about production than I would learn anywhere else. Yeah. You have to be in the room. It's not something you can imagine. It's not something, you know, you can write down. It's not like that. It's just, it's intangible. It's in the atmosphere. And when you sit there long enough, you hope that some of it rubs off on you, and which it did. I felt, you know, comfortable.
So how long were you kind of in that assistant engineer state before you moved up to be a first engineer and then a requested first engineer?
Yeah, well, at that time, Criteria Studios was really two studios. It was Studio A and Studio B. Mm-hmm. And there were two main engineers, Ron Albert and Chuck Kirkpatrick. And Atlantic Records started booking more and more and more sessions. So in one room, it might be the Young Rascals, in another room, Dr. John, or, you know, Aretha Franklin, whatever it was. And so the need for more engineers became obvious. So basically, they just sort of picked me up and sat me down in the engineers section. It says, press the button. So it was, you know, need and want, I suppose. I mean, but, you know, there were, you know, times of, you know, cutting your teeth and learning. And they were all gracious enough. Jerry Wexler was gracious. I mean, and you know, Tommy Dowd, and they all nursed everybody along the way and said, this is what I want you to do. And so I could never have better educators as far as making records than those three guys. And of course, Albie was Tommy Dowd's first assistant.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Tommy was doing a project called Rod Stewart, Tonight's the Night. And he goes, I need somebody to write strings and conduct strings. And Albie says, I can do that. And so Tommy sent Albie to New York and put strings on Rod Stewart record. So I mean, there was camaraderie at Criteria, and you were there. That involved everybody in this mix. I mean, Ron and Howard Albert went on to do, the Crosby, Stills and Nash, and later Don Gaiman came in and was engineering great records, and Chicago, the band. I mean, there was this mix of artists and engineers and producers who had this little place in Miami, Florida, where they all felt comfortable.
Yeah.
Where the atmosphere wasn't LA and it wasn't New York. It was Southeast Florida. And we all grew up together.
Somebody once said to me about the artists that came to Criteria, they came for the drugs and they stayed because of hugs, meaning that the
That's pretty close.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there was a while there. There was a while that got a little out of control.
But the atmosphere that you just described is exactly. I mean, last year when we all saw each other at the reunion, that was literally one of like the 3 or 4 best days of my life. To know that all the rest of you felt like I felt. That all these years I've clung on to these dreams that I was hoping wasn't my imagination or a fantasy, that there was such a brotherhood of generosity and sharing of ideas and friendly rivals. It's like, I want to work on that record. He wants to work on that record, but whoever gets picked, it's fine. And we would all trade licks and chops. There was no like backstabbing.
Right, exactly. It was all for, again, that communication, the idea that we want these records to be really good. And we want the artists to have freedom to express themselves. And, there wasn't a lot of budget pressure in those days. I mean, because obviously Jerry Wexler, who had a house in Miami Beach, he was an executive vice president of Atlantic Records. And Tom Dowd, who, God, if you read about Tom Dowd, he was part of the Manhattan Project. I mean, Tommy Dowd has amazing amount of chops and experiences. And, Arif Mardini, who conducted all those strings and wrote all those horn parts. I mean, he's doing the hand claps and jive talking. I mean, there's just talent. And, the idea is that we all got along. We all had fun.
I think it might have been my first day of Criteria. Studio C had just recently been built. You were working on Clapton in there. The Bee Gees worked in there. And Tom Dowd and Arif were working on Rod Stewart, and they were working on Do You Think I'm Sexy? And I could hear, my job, Steve Klein gave me the vacuum cleaner and said, go vacuum the carpet in the lobby of Studio C. Right. And Klein did that with such a big smile on his face. He loved having somebody to hand that off to, Anyway, it was all part of the training, and I eventually understood that. And so I'm vacuuming, and I could see these 2 older gentlemen, because I was 19 and they were probably late 40s to mid 50s, and they're playing pinball in the Nippet pinball machine. Sure. And I could see they were annoyed that I didn't have enough sense to not vacuum while they were playing the game of their life. Right. And at some point I said, excuse me, and I think it was Tommy, I tapped him on the shoulder while he was standing next to Arif, who was going for big points. And I said, excuse me, you look like you know what you're doing. Could you tell me, how do you make a hit record? And almost anybody else would have just said, screw off, kid. But he was such a gracious guy and saw the fire in my belly and the stars in my eyes that he and Arif stopped this like blood match game they were playing. And he said, look, kid, on the other side of that wall, we've got one of the greatest artists of all time. We've got the best session players money can buy. We got the best studio money can buy. I don't know if we're making a hit record in there. And then he pointed to the window out like where the warehouses are down at the end of the block, where PBS was.
Yeah.
And he said, somewhere in one of those warehouses is a kid with a 4-track machine, and he's making a hit record. You know why? I said, no. He said, because he's got a hit song. That's how you make hit records.
Yeah.
That's the nature of the people that we worked around, that they were so profoundly insightful and so generous.
Well, Jerry Wexler was very inspiring. I mean, he always equated making a record like building a house. You start out with the foundation. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have the right foundation, the house will fall. And usually the foundation was the song, the intent, the architectural plan, and yet the actual foundation was the rhythm, the bass and the drums and the guitar and the piano. So that these four instruments accompanying any modern record would, start the house. And, when you got to finishing the roof, the horns and the strings, and having the person inside the house who's the vocalist, that became the personality of the house. And so Jerry's analogy was sort of like that. And I always got it. And Jerry was a great producer. We were doing Aretha Franklin, a song called Spanish Harlem. And the lyric was something like, do you know it's black in Spanish Harlem, right?
Yeah.
Jerry presses the talk back and he goes, Aretha, darling, when you say black, say it. And boy, she knew exactly what he said. And he had that way of communicating. And that's what communication, that's what we do.
Absolutely. So your personality, your laid-back, confident personality, was that what led to, tell the story, and I promise, Karl, he said, please don't make this all about the Bee Gees, because I've done that interview 1,000 times.
Spent many years with those guys.
Yeah, but so there's some things I want to talk about with them, but this is really more about you and your career. But part and parcel to that, you worked on the Main Course record, which was their comeback record. They'd had hits years before, like 10 years before or something.
Oh, yeah.
But they were never like a super group. They were a well-known group, but they achieved super group status after they recorded this stuff at Criteria, and Jive Talkin' was their big comeback song that said, hey, we're back. So how did you get chosen to be the engineer on that record, and who did you work with on it?
Well, the producer from Atlantic was Arif Mardin. Mm-hmm. And Arif and I had done a project right before that with a band from Scotland called the Average White Band. And they had a hit called Pick Up the Pieces. I think this thing is moving, so I got it.
That's all right. We can hear you just fine, though.
Okay, I know. I just don't want thumps to take everybody's woofer out. Sorry. Okay, that's better. And the Average White Band was a soul band from Scotland. Yeah. The lead singer's name was Hamish Stewart or whatever. But they had these funk songs. And Arif says to me, Karl, I'm bringing down a band here. They sing like angels. So we'll be here recording in the next couple of months or something. So I said, who's that? He goes, the Bee Gees. I said, I know the Bee Gees. To Love Somebody and all Massachusetts and all that stuff. Yeah. And he goes, yeah. I says, well, yeah, they harmonize. He goes, yeah, they sing like angels. Because he had done an album in England with the Bee Gees called Life in a Tin Can that basically went nowhere. So he says, well, maybe I'll bring him to Florida and we'll do a little R&B experiment or whatever whatever. Yeah. So, I had learned that the Eagles were recording with a click track in the drummer's earphones, mm-hmm. right? So that's nice to know. So Arif says to me before the session, he goes, do you know anything about a click track? I said, yeah, we could rig one up. So Dennis Bryden was the drummer for the Bee Gees band. They brought everybody over from England, and I rigged a click track up. And we started to make really rhythmic records where, it was important to have the groove, like a lot of Atlantic Records projects. Every record today almost, right? Yeah. So the click track became an essential part of it. And Dennis he learned how to do it. He could play with the click in his headphones just at the right level so that he felt comfortable holding the groove. And that made a big difference. The other thing that Barry Gibb and Robin had not experienced before was stereophonic headphones. So we mixed the headphone mix in Studio B in stereo. So when those guys sang on the microphone and heard that sound with the reverb, they go, whatever you're doing, Karl, don't stop doing it. So that was, that was the success of my relationship beginning with the Bee Gees. And because I had already worked at Arif, we were like doing a lot of nodding together and shaking our heads together so that we agreed, boy, this is great, And he had the confidence in me that I know I'm going to press the red light and I'm not going to miss anything. So, it was important to have that relationship. And a lot of times I would be the only person in the control room because Arif is out there conducting the band or, making notes or doing whatever in the actual recording space. So, and that record, it generated 3 number 1 records. Well, three pop chart records, but a couple of number 1s. Nights on Broadway. There was a lot of cool music at that time. And Barry Gibb on Nights on Broadway sort of discovered his falsetto. Because Arif has asked him, he says, Barry, you guys do really high harmonies, falsetto voice. Barry says, I think I can do that. So that where it became the I blame it all on the Nights on Broadway. All that became part of the ambience of the Gibbs from then on.
Absolutely a signature sound. It's funny, Robin cupping his hand over his ear was the iconic image of the Bee Gees, but it was Barry's falsetto, but everybody thought it was always Robin because he was the one in the pictures cupping his hand.
Well, yeah. Excuse me, I have to. By the way, the M here, that's Echo Mountain Recorders in Asheville, North Carolina, which had some great experiences there. We can talk about the mountains of North Carolina anytime we want. But
I love Asheville. The best single meal I've ever had at any restaurant was in Asheville. Downtown there's that building that's like a slice of cheese. It's one of those triangular buildings.
Absolutely.
Across the street, kind of kitty corner from the point of that cheese was a little cafe. And I went there with a dear friend of mine named Ralph Murphy from ASCAP. And the two of us just looked at each other and said, Ralph is a foodie who's been all over the world. I looked at him and said, this is the best single meal I've ever eaten in my life. And he goes, I was just thinking that. And Asheville, I love
Asheville,
that
I've spent a lot of time there. I mean, you and I could reminisce for days.
So you got invited to do the next Bee Gees stuff. Tell everybody the story about how Arif couldn't work with the Bee Gees anymore because of the politics of Atlantic and RSO Records and all that.
That's correct. The Bee Gees manager's name was Robert Stigwood, and he had a record label called RSO Records, Robert Stigwood Organization. And he was a manager by trade. Well, actually, he's an ex-accountant from Australia, but that's a long story. And one of the other artists on RSO was Eric Clapton, of all people, that was on Atlantic. And when RSO decided, Robert Stigwood, that Atlantic was no longer going to be the promotional label for his entity, he made a deal with Polygram. And Arif Mardin had a contractual obligation to Atlantic Records. In those days, they signed house producers such that, you do our artists or our affiliation artists, as our affiliation groups. And the Bee Gees discovered that they were no longer going to be able to work with Arif as the producer. And they checked out of our next obligation in Florida and went to California to work with, I forget his name, but a famous LA producer.
Richard Perry, maybe?
Richard Perry, yeah. And he had done like the Pointer Sisters or something.
Right.
And that didn't work out for many reasons. And I got a call from Barry one day on the phone, Barry Gibb, and he goes, Karl, we'd love our studio time back. We know we don't have Arif, but we want to produce ourselves with you as our engineer, and we'll just make records together. So I worked with the office, Margie, and, Edie, and I said, can we have all the studio time back for Studio B, blah, blah, blah. Sure. Because, it's the Bee Gees. We had hit records right then. And so we went to do it. And the rest is sort of history because my partner, Albie, was in England at the time doing a record with Dick James Music. And we had known each other because he rented our front couch from Chuck Kirkpatrick and I.
I remember that.
Yeah, he rented our couch for $25 a month. So, and because we were all music junkies, we would go out and buy the latest. I remember what Beatles album, Abbey Road, something came out.
Yeah.
And we wore the thing out, and new artists were coming out all the time, Tom Petty or whatever. And so, it was three musical guys who shared basically the same space, and just had keys to the place. So it was very like, let's solve all these these recording, songwriting, issues as a team and have fun doing it.
And it was a team. I mean, I was in like the second or third wave of the golden era at Criteria, but the energy and the love and the camaraderie was all still there from the first wave. I believe the first wave was probably Ronnie and Howie. You were like wave 1.5.
Yeah.
And I guess I was probably in wave 2. I started there in 75, I think. So
somewhere, yeah.
I remember so many nights, like walking down, making the left by the front desk to go to the men's room, and I would see like people pouring out of the mastering room, which was a tiny little room. It was like smaller than a walk-in closet.
Sure.
And it had this big scully lathe the size of like, an industrial range at a restaurant sitting in there. But there would be like 6 guys crammed in there listening to like, listening to like Abbey Road, listening to Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. And I would join this. I felt so privileged that nobody said, "Hey, you're the new kid, get out of here." But what you guys were doing was listening to the bass sound. You would listen to the bass sound on every song on a record in the mastering room because the speakers were tuned nicely, and you were analyzing. Do you think it was all direct? Do you think it was a combination of direct and amp? Sounds to me like they boosted, 150, not 100. Sounds like they used this kind of compressor, and there was this group analysis of how these sounds happened, and yet when the party broke up half an hour later, everybody walked out of there enriched with new ideas for how to get sounds. It was so cool.
Yeah. Well, if you go back to the days of the early, like Record Plant, they had the same phenomena. And certainly, Wally Hyder in LA, and there's certain studios in LA that, had the same kind of team attitude. I mean, there was different sounds, Memphis had a different sound than, Miami or Los Angeles or Nashville, certainly. And so people would huddle around and give these opinions and these ideas, and that's what kind of created those environments, sounds, Muscle Shoals, Alabama. I mean, look at that. There's just groups of people who understood what they were trying to do and trying to make it better,
Yeah, and I don't think anybody intentionally said, let's create a Miami sound. It was it kind of grew out of whoever showed up as far as who the acts were, combined with a big influence from Tommy Dowd, Arif Mardin, Jerry Wexler. Yeah. You put all that stuff together, in a crock pot, and out comes the stew.
Right. Well, don't forget Henry Stone down in Hialeah, TK Records, and that was another part of the Miami sound. The KC and the Sunshine Band, all that stuff was part of the Miami. And I mastered some of those KC records in the cutting room at Criteria. So, I mean, we all knew each other. I mean, it was like, sure, why not? I mean, Steve Alamo, very much responsible for a lot of that. Yeah. So there's a gang who, I mean, it's just everybody knows everybody. I think the business itself is expanded, multiple times, and yet you still see artists who get together and know each other. You see these groups like John Legend and Pink, and you see all the people nowadays who get together and hang out and talk and do things together. And it's that same camaraderie. Because think about what music is. I mean, really, you know, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that us human beings have figured out how to do. And it's a communication tool. And look at between the Grammys and all these people who celebrate music and the economic engine that it is, as well as the heart engine that it is, and that transcends, you know, uh, all the ideas about conflict. It really does, and it's such a cool thing to be involved in, and like you are, you're in
Yeah.
there every day, L.A. I
I
mean,
well, even
you
no
work with
matter
some
where I
really
live.
cool people and talented people, and you know, the goal is to be successful. But I mean, you can't make a hit record without an audience. Somebody has
Right.
to be involved in it, and it's not the desire for such a big economic well-being as it is. Hey, I got to get my stuff out. My message out. I got to get. Imagine an artist. A person works in sculpture or painting. Painting. Well, I could paint anything. I got a blank canvas. You know, and there's a million techniques. Abstract, reality, anywhere in between, and pick a color. Pick your own, mix your own colors. So, yet that communication works. Look at all the famous artists throughout history, and they got through. But it was a mass acceptance. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a million billion artists who've never made. They're still in the cellar, and it's an amazing phenomena when that mass audience works. Um, when I was a kid, back in the '60s, I read a book by Marshall McLuhan called "Understanding Media." It's a '60s phenomena, a hot thing. And a lot of us were involved in it with, early days of rock and roll and music and stuff. And when you go back and read that book, it's about the hot media and the cold media. And the hot media is about how, when you communicate to human beings, we use our imagination, like a song, a love song. You might imagine who that person is, but everybody else has a different imagination who that is.
Mm.
And look at a movie, though. A movie is cold media. Why? Because it's a script. It's already written. They're just laying out the story to you. But when you use a hot media like music, a communication, how about a novel? Same thing. You got a novel. It's describing a storm. You know what that storm looks like, but the guy next to you has a different storm. So, hot media. It communicates in a different way. And Marshall McLuhan, by the way, he predicted the existence of the World Wide Web 35 years before it ever happened.
Wow.
So when you read that novel, read that treatise, he's a philosopher. And I understood that going through it. I was like, well, this is cool. I mean, yeah. And so, but, he saw the global village. That was his coin. He coined the phrase global village back in the 60s. So there was a revolution. And I was, bell-bottom jeans and long hair. Sure, why not? It's, that the idea is it all got through. But if people go back and look at that treatise, they'll understand a little bit about how people get emotionally connected to some of the artwork that they're doing and that they're observing. And I'm a student of all of that, so.
Sticking with the emotion theme for a minute, you remember the hallway up on the second floor that took you from the lobby of Studio A
Sure.
over to Studio C, and you walk by Mac's office and Tel Air and all that stuff up there. So I'm walking through there one day, 19-year-old kid, and I see Barry Gibb coming, like 50 feet away at me. And I thought, well, he's always been polite. He says hi to me in the hallway. He knows I work here. He may not know my name. But again, I was new in the industry and just filled with curiosity. And I said, Barry, excuse me, my name's Michael. He goes, yeah, I know who you are. I said, do you mind if I ask you, because I'd already been told by Tommy Dowd that you needed a hit song.
Yeah.
So I said to Barry Gibb, what makes a song a hit? And the look on his face, I will never forget that my entire life. The look on his face, like, you don't know? He didn't say the words, but the look said everything. And he said, emotion, mate, it's emotion. And then he just walked away. And so that brings us right back to where you just were, which is emotion. That is the job of media, for better or for worse, is to make you feel something.
Yes. I mean, you cry at the end of a movie.
Yeah.
Cry at the end of a book.
And you know what? You brought up books, movies, and music. They all have something in common, which is an arc, a story arc, a song arc. They start here, they end up there, and
theoretically.
Yeah, right, exactly. The good ones, the ones that get the attention of large numbers in the public. And I think the job of a creator is to follow that arc within reason while still maintaining their own creativity and getting their message out there in the way that they heard it in their head so that other people can relate. So an arc is kind of like life, if you think about it. I hate to get all philosophical, but it really is. It's the story of our lives.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we learn as we go, and hopefully as we get older, we have the ability to teach that learning to somebody else. Because we all know it's a finite life on this earth. And so, we want to share that information. We want to share that enthusiasm and that energy. And you're right. It's an arc. It goes from birth to death. And so a story does that. A movie does that. And songs, they always had to end at 3 minutes and 15 seconds when, when pop music was around. So, I mean, yes, of course, there's an arc. And so I think you got it. Every cycle, there's cycles. I mean, in business, there's a business cycle. There's the economic cycle. And so, you learn that everything moves. It's not stale. It's not the same.
I want to go back to the Bee Gees for a minute because we really didn't finish that story as far as, okay, so Barry calls you up, says, I want the studio time back. I want you back. And
sure.
At some point, I think you said, can I invite Albie to join us? And they said, yeah. And you guys became co-producers on the project. So how was that? Barry Gibb is almost singular in the amount of talent rolled up in that guy, and the other two brothers certainly, weren't riding his coattails. They were a unit. How was it for you and Albie to work with people who were that talented and kind of had their own vision? Did you feel at all intimidated? Did you feel honored? What were your emotions like at the beginning days of starting that record?
Oh, it's not intimidation at all. It's joining forces. In other words, you're part of the team. You contribute as much as you can, and they do as well. You can take criticism, and so can they. So the idea is you have a common goal, the manifestation of an idea or a song, and in modern media, it's something that you can play back to other people. Because it's okay for Barry to sit there on his couch and do this, but that's not recorded. So, the idea is we need to make a project, but make a painting out of this, and mix the color of purple and mix our greens, and put it on the canvas. And eventually that canvas has to be taken down and framed and given to everybody else. So there's an ending to that project. You have to create that art form, and records, music recording was that project. So we're all able to say, well, that purple's a little crazy for me, and I don't want it over there on the right. So, what I mean? There's all kind of opinions going back and forth. but uh, it's a bowl to digest everything. And I think Barry trusted me to do the sound and the technical aspects of, gee, I played this. Is it on tape? You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
what does it sound like? Does it fit in? Whatever. And Albie was more responsible for music. Gee, that's a B flat, but you really, you could have gone to the four chord, and we might get a little more attention and interest in that. So we all talk in slightly different languages, but we all get the same goal. And Barry's going, well, gee, yeah, if I hold that chord a little longer, put two more beats in there, what happens? Oh, let's find out. So, we're experimenting as we do. We're finding out.
So you each had your own lane, but yet you all merged in to one thing. And I suspected as much. I mean, there were only a couple times I was ever in the control room when you worked
Right.
on those records. Actually, I think one of them was I think I either held a pencil or a drumstick that had a tape loop going around it. One night, John Blanche or somebody came and grabbed me and had me standing like out. Can you tell the story? Because look, back in those days, samplers didn't exist. Drummers played to a click track, and that was still a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
Remember the old Yuri click track with the blackface?
Oh, yeah. Sure. Well, the fact that, I mean, the handling of the Eagles played to one, I thought was pretty
Right.
pretty astounding knowledge to me. But the idea is, the idea is that human beings respond to metric order, especially modern metric order, and it feels good. It appeals to this energy of backbone, and there's a whole part of your body that feels it. And so, when it lands in a place that everybody can communicate that this is the place it should land, the beat, and do all this, yeah. And so we were involved in the idea that if the drummer played it right, why can't we use it again? Make a loop.
Right. So
the idea is,
explain the process, because it was
Well, the
really
process
fascinating.
well, you transfer, 2 bars or 4 bars, 4 measures, to another piece of tape, and then you splice the 2 pieces of tape, the head to the tail, and so it becomes a loop, and so it goes around, and then you play that back over the playhead, and then you transfer that information to the master recorder, so that everybody else can play along with that drum. So it's a drum machine before drum machines, basically, except it has feel. It has something that's intangible, so that in between the beats is a certain part of time that everybody kind of, it's a lope, or maybe it's a hesitation, or maybe it's a feeling like, it makes, and depending on the tempo perhaps, or it's all mostly 4/4 time or 2/4 time. You don't usually do this in waltz or 6/8. You do usually 4/4. And so the idea is that it's metric, and people can hang their hat on that, including other musicians. Let's say I'm hearing a tape loop and I'm a piano player. I know when I'm right and I know when I'm wrong because I landed right where it landed. So I have the confidence now to just be there. I don't have to think about it. I just do it. And so a lot of people found that playing in time gave them just this wonderful relaxation. And okay, I'm comfortable with this. And when you listen to the final product, everybody goes, that feels damn good. Yeah. So, part of the process was getting that emotional connection with rhythm. And look at how much rhythm is involved in modern recordings.
You guys, I mean, had you ever heard of anybody else doing what you did as far as making these loops?
Yes. Albie had experience with tape loops at Berklee School of Music, where he went to school. And if you go back to, there was tape loop machines made, like a synthesizer looking thing that used tape loops to generate string sounds,
Oh, Mellotron. Yeah.
mellotrons. And so we just applied that theory to rhythm and kept the loop at consistent speed theoretically, and so that it felt really good. And yet, those in between eighth notes they might have been a little 5 millisecond delay or 5 millisecond acceleration, so that it get this kind of natural tempo shift that electronic drum machines are not capable of doing unless you engineer them with some kind of algorithm that tells them to do this. So the idea is that mathematics may not be what you want.
People copied you instantly. I remember Ken Calais, who I think you know.
Sure.
Ken and I have become pretty good friends in the last year, and
good.
he lives like 5 minutes from me.
Back.
And,
Yeah.
we've talked about the things that happened back in our era that then became like a trend, a stylistic trend that spread like wildfire. Again, through this community of this band of brothers of us who were engineers, even though some of us worked at the record plant, some at Criteria, but we would read interviews about other engineers and recording engineer producer, and then we would put on the record, go, oh, that's how they did that. So I remember at the time when you guys started using loops, man, that caught on like wildfire. And it was serendipitous in that disco was a thing. The Bee Gees certainly had a disco influence that came into their music compared to their old stuff. And the combination of these perfect drum beats and disco needing a perfect drum beat, just you guys were like, they're friggin' geniuses. And they were right, because you were, and here's why. You guys, it didn't come out sterile. It totally had humanity. Not just the drum beat, but everything you did on top of it. So how did you keep the humanity on top of these near perfect beats without making it sound, robotic?
Well, look at, like you said, Barry Gibb. Look at the artists we were working with. I mean, these guys are very emotionally talented human beings, and when Barry sings, or somebody sings, Stevie Wonder sings, you can feel the rhythm in their voice, and it's like just the undercurrent of syncopation is exactly what is needed at that point. I mean, but the vocalist, the artist of the day, is setting the real link to where that falls, and and again, instead of just piano players knowing where the groove is going to go, singers love it. Now, there's certain singers who don't sing so much in the groove. Barbra Streisand, for one. But, she has a different clock, but she still lands where the landing is. And so it's really amazing to watch her record and perform, because she intrinsically she knows where it is, but she has something to say with her voice. And so she's going to say it. And that's cool. I mean, it all fits. It really does. I think it's the artist that you're working with answers your question, because the idea is that they get it, and because we make vocal records, these aren't instrumentals, and so the idea is that the artist has a lot to sell and say about how that all puts itself together.
Yeah, the Bee Gees vocals had like a soaring. They lifted you up. They were anthemic without being like ta-da. And I always marveled at the background vocals. I mean, I know that they were incredible singers. They had a blend the Eagles were the only other band of that era, maybe of all eras, where those two bands were famous for their blend, just the right voices, right time, and songs written for the blend. How did you approach recording and producing the background vocals? Because they became angelic, as you described, Arif described them to you. They were absolutely angelic, but yet the backgrounds, I spent years trying to figure out actually kind of how to copy that sound when I would work with people who had great backgrounds like that, but they weren't the Bee Gees. But, rolling out a little bit of middle so that you had some air. They weren't so close, so in your face. Cross-fading reverb, a vocal on the left had reverb on the right and vice versa. What were your techniques that made the Bee Gees vocals sound so angelic and tight without losing actually adding to the humanity? How did you do it?
Well, the Gibbs, obviously, you say they have a real sound that accompanies them. They're all, they have some DNA that's in common.
Yes, they do.
And the fact that Robin sings with vibrato and tremolo, and Barry sings with tremolo, but he doesn't do very pitched. So, and Morris sings with straight tones, flat tones. So, those three things warbling away, create this harmonizing buzz of harmonics. And so, but again, that's the Gibbs signature. We did a lot of multi-tracking because we had this facility. We call it infinite number of tracks. And this is before Pro Tools and all that stuff, where we'd lock up two 24 tracks together, but we'd have a master reel and a slave reel. So the slave reel could have, is a 24 track machine. So you got one sync track, it can have 23 tracks of music on it, or recorded signals.
Right, you could have,
but you can have as many
vocals.
Slaves as you want. Yeah, but you could have, 20 slaves.
And then you would bounce them back to the master eventually.
To the master. So everything we did was second generation or third generation using Dolby decoding and encoding, so that it was really tricky technology-wise. But the idea was we knew that you get this air sound, and a lot of bands did that at the same time. Peter Gabriel and those guys, they were all doing it, because they knew multi-tracking. I mean, when you say communicate, Phil Ramone, who is a very respected engineer producer, over many, many years from New York, and Phil was gracious in sharing information. I asked him, we went to record Barbra Streisand. Well, what's the mic? What's that sound of Barbara? Oh yeah, you use this, microphone, M49. Okay, good. And so the idea is that, again, it's camaraderie, it's joining forces and understanding that. But I think your question, I don't know how to answer the whole question, but I think you're close.
I was trying to make nice to the folks in the chat room who are all engineer types. I'm sure they want me to pry a lot of engineering technical stuff out of you, so I will from time to time. I'll do my best. Do you have an engineering philosophy that is part and parcel to you, that maybe travels with you from record to record, or is it all just dictated by the moment and the artist?
I'd say a little more of the latter.
Okay.
Just be flexible. If you don't have the favorite mic, you don't need it. There's certain things that you get used to, but if you don't have them, maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Be accepting of the idea that, landscape changes. I mean, I remember I used to do a lot of live recording.
Yeah.
And live recording, either you get it or you don't get it.
Right.
And I did the Commodores. I remember the band Commodores. And they had, Lionel Richie, plays piano, but the horn players would sing at the same time as playing horns, trumpets. So you can't, I don't have what are you going to press the buttons and pad all the mics? No. You give them two mics. You record them on that many tracks. So that when they sing, when they sing, forget the horn mics. But when they play horns, forget the singing mics. So you have to, in the mix, that's where the horns come in. Yeah, okay. But it was the way to record it live. And you learn that by figuring out, that's the thing. I mean, my first live experience of real engineering. I did Rare Earth, the band Rare Earth, Celebrate. Remember Celebrate?
Yeah, absolutely.
At the Miami Marine Stadium.
Oh, and just so everybody knows, this is on Key Biscayne. It was a very popular venue at the time.
Yeah, it's on the Rickenbacker Causeway. Yes.
Yeah, and they had a floating
Miami and Key Biscayne, exactly.
With a floating stage, right?
The stage is a barge that floats about 8 feet off the shore. I mean, it's on the water. So the PA guy was Hanley, who had done the PA at Woodstock. Remember the festival, festival at Woodstock? Very respected PA company. And I'm going on the barge with my 16-track multi-track tape machine and a little Tascam console, and some Harvard, some put together stuff from the studio boxes and stuff. And the show's going to start in 10 minutes. And there's a hum. And then the circuit breakers start to blow between the PA, right, and the light people. So I had no idea. Nobody knew what was going on. And there's 6,000 people in the Marine Stadium lighting lighters like, where's the band? Okay, we're ready. And we're scrambling around on stage looking to make the circuit breakers stay on. So I looked at the bass guitar box, and the guitar bass direct is a box that takes the high impedance signal from the bass guitar pickup, translates it into low impedance so we can all record it, and then sends the high impedance signal back to the guitar amp so that everybody could hear it on stage. Well, the bass direct ground didn't matter. We lifted and it didn't matter. So I suspected that. So I unplugged the Canon, the XLR from the bass direct, and I said, this is the problem. No problem. The hum went away. So I said, well, we tried another direct box. It wasn't the direct box, it wasn't the technology. The other choice was to record the amp on stage or make a way to ground the PA and the recording equipment that was on the barge. And what I did was I took a XLR mic cable with a big, thick shield, plugged it in the back of the tape machine on an unused connector, and threw it in Biscayne Bay. Then I went on the other side of the stage up to the PA console, found an unused XLR, and threw the shield in Biscayne Bay.
The ultimate.
And then we grounded the show to Biscayne Bay in Miami, and the show went on.
So, only somebody with your technical background before you started pushing faders would have figured that out.
But you had 5,000, 6,000 angry people, and, God knows how many other people, like promoters. But I invited the band, Rare Earth, back to Studio B, where we had the quadraphonic speakers in the control room, and I stuck the band in front of us and the crowd mics behind us, and I mixed the concert for Rare Earth, the band. And we sat there all night long in Studio B and, drink a couple of beers and congratulate ourselves. True story.
I remember when I first started working at Criteria, the rooms were all set up to do quad. And yes. I can't remember who it was, but somebody. I think it might have been Bob Marley. I assisted for like 2 or 3 days on a Bob Marley record. I remember they used to carry Adidas gym bags. Each guy had like a pound or two of weed in his bag. Come in the control room. Cones. Yeah, fire up these spliffs. I mean, I never thought that such a thing as a contact high was a real thing, but it was when you work with those guys. Anyway, I think it was Bob Marley walked in the control room. Who was our coworker? Extremely good-looking sweetheart of a guy, Alex Sadkin.
Yes,
he was working with them, and Bob Marley walks in the room, and Alex was screwing around putting something in the rear speakers, and Bob goes, "We've only got 2 ears, man."
Yeah, Bob Marley was a special guy. I remember I was sitting on that couch in the lobby, and on my left is Aretha Franklin, on my right is Bob Marley. And she whispers in my ear, "Can you translate?"
Oh man,
it was magic times.
They were. So here's going back to your personal generosity. The first time I ever got to be, I'd worked with you as like the second assistant engineer on parts of There's One in Every Crowd with Eric Clapton.
Right.
I worked with you on a record called Mama's Pride. Oh, you know what? I'm going to tell this story now first. Mama's Pride. So Ahmet Erdogan, the chairman and CEO of Atlantic Records, is in St. Louis, and his limousine gets a flat tire. And he walks into a place called the Rusty Springs Saloon, I believe, and sees this Southern rock band up on the stage. And he walks up there. He's a little short, kind of rotund guy with a bald head, a little goatee, and a very thick Turkish accent. And he walks up and goes, "I want to sign you to a contract tomorrow morning." And they were like, "What? Who the hell are you?" And he did. He went and had breakfast with him the next morning, and he signed him to Atlantic, and he brought him to Criteria. And, oh man, there are two good stories that are going to come out of this. So you and Gursky and I got put on that record, but I was there as a trainee following Gursky around.
Right.
And the band, we were doing it in Studio C, which is a fairly small, pretty damn dead room. And this is
Right,
like
right.
a live rock band. And so we're cranking away, and nothing is really working, you know. And Ahmet came in at one point and goes, no, this isn't the band I heard in St. Louis. And
Sure.
and Arif was getting frustrated, and I believe that you were the one that actually said, well, the room's too dead for a rock band. And I think you ordered up like 30 sheets of 4x8, half-inch thick plywood. And we put plywood on the floor and around the like the wainscoting of the wall to liven
We
the
didn't
room
do
up.
that many, but it was some. Yeah, it's just a little bit.
Well,
Yeah.
I remembered a lot. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
whatever. It's been 40 some years, but and I can't remember who suggested. Maybe the band actually said, "Can't we just play it live like we do on stage? That's what we do best." And it transformed that record instantly just by giving them a little more liveness to the room and letting them do what they did, rather than originally we were cutting like bass drums and a rhythm guitar going chank, chank, and they just couldn't capture the feel. But the minute you put them all in a room, and I think we stuck Pat, whatever his name was, the lead vocalist, maybe in the airlock or something, so he could sing a scratch vocal with the band, and all of a sudden it came to life, and it was a great record. So I'm there like a puppy following Gursky around, and Gursky's being a little bit of a hard ass with me, because that's the way you trained people at Criteria, like a loving hard ass. There, a lot is expected of you. Don't let me down. And
Well,
so,
yeah. You know,
so
you got to be. Yeah.
we had 3 airplane or bus seats in the back of the control room, like 4 feet back from the console, sitting up against the back wall. And on one side of that back wall was a multi-track tape machine. On the other side was a countertop. And Gursky says, "Look, the band is playing this live, and they're probably not going to stop between songs. I think they're going for a full set. So we're going to need to change the multi-track tape. And we can't afford to lose, like, we can't spend 3 minutes doing this. So here's the deal. I'm giving you a blank reel of tape with the tail hanging off of it. You're going to stand on that side of the back of the control room. I'm going to be standing right here next to the tape machine, and you are not going to take your eyes off of me. In the minute that I give you a nod, you need to walk briskly from one side to the other, and I'm going to take my reel off and hand it to you. You're going to take it to the other side. You're going to put it in the box, and you're going to write master on it so we don't lose it. And I'm going to take the reel you gave me. I'm going to thread that sucker faster than anybody's ever threaded a tape machine in their life, and hit record or play and record. And that way we might only lose a couple of bars, and we can always do an edit later. Okay, gotcha, Steve-O. So meanwhile, Ahmet and his lady friend come in, and they sit down in the airplane seats behind the console.
Oh God.
And Gursky gives me the high sign. I tripped or stumbled or something, and I dropped a reel of 2-inch on Ahmet's lady friend's foot. And I literally heard the snapping of the bone.
I think I remember something that happened.
So I
But your
mean,
memory's better than mine, I got to say. Go ahead.
well, I got a couple of years on you, but not many. And so, well, of course, I remember this because I thought my career was over. You don't forget that stuff. So here I am dropping, like an 8-pound reel of 2-inch tape on the foot of the lady friend of the chairman of Atlantic Records, and it broke. Whatever the top bone is that goes across your foot, snapped it. I heard it snap, and her foot swelled up like a pumpkin. I mean, the thing got huge in an instant. And Gursky just looked at me like, that's it. Nice knowing you, you're toast. And Amit stood up and wagged his finger in my face and said, what's your name? You'll never work in this industry again. And you, being the cool guy that you always were, you're like, it's okay. It's all right. It's all good, And I went out in the airlock and just buried my face in my hands. I wanted that job so badly, and I appreciated that job so much. I thought, Tommy Dowd came out into the airlock, and he put his arms around me. He literally put his hands on my shoulders and rubbed his thumbs into my shoulders and said, I saw the whole thing. It was an honest mistake. You're not going to lose your job. I won't let Amit get you fired.
Yeah. Yeah. Amit was quite a character. I mean, I had a few run-ins with Amit Erdogan over my years, but no, I it's not your fault. I mean, gravity, is all over the earth.
Well,
I mean, I don't see that as a problem, but no, he obviously signed the group, not realizing what he didn't have. What I mean?
Right.
It's just okay, Amit. This is a nice. I don't know the motive. I'm not going to go there. But I think it's another project in the studio where things happen that are completely unpredictable, and you survived. I mean, that's the whole thing.
By the hair, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things where in my younger days I made a few mistakes, and you learn how to deal with it. I mean, it's part of life. Everybody makes mistakes, and it's innocent. It's not intentional. So who knows? I don't know. I mean, I do know that Amit Erdogan and Nesuhi Erdogan, who owned Atlantic or started Atlantic Records, the reason for them coming to New York and starting Atlantic Records was because they were from Istanbul, Turkey,
Right.
And they loved rhythmic music, African music, rhythmic. And in those days, they called it race music.
Right.
And so they started Atlantic Records with the intent of releasing that energy on the record business. And they had some money to do it. And Jerry Wexler was a short story writer in New York City.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And he became an executive. Eventually, he worked his way up to executive vice president of Atlantic Records because he knew the day-to-day communication. But he was a brilliant producer because he knew the value of a song, and he knew how to get an artist to relate to the value of a song, and whether it's Aretha or anybody. And he had that communication ability, and so I think Amit and Nesuhi was a passion of their soul. But I think the nuts and bolts and human interface was Jerry Wexler, and eventually Arif Marin obviously was from Istanbul. He was from Turkey. Right. So that whole connection with what they used to call race music is a fascinating story, and there should be an anthology of it somewhere. I haven't read it, but there should be some explanation of that whole era of Atlantic Records and Atlantic music. And
there's a documentary that I saw about how in the early days they would record stuff in the office in New York and push desks to the side, which was not uncommon back then. It was in the Tommy Dowd documentary.
Tommy Dowd, yeah, it was all about Tommy and the fact that he knew New York City studio time was precious, and this is this little record company, and I mean, who knew what Atlantic Records was going to grow into? I mean, and then of course, they signed Cream and, Eric Clapton and Cream. And I mean, they signed some pretty significant artists over the years. And so, It's an interesting. There's an interesting story, obviously, because their competition was what Clive Davis and Columbia, and
Yeah.
I mean, there's only that so much competition and Elektra Records, and so that in those early days, corporations, it's the lifeblood, making money.
Boy, we were so lucky to work in that era. Just, I mean,
Yes,
you beat me by probably 4 or 5 years, and I've always been a little envious of that in a healthy way. But just, I got in on like the middle to the tail of the golden years of Criteria, and to work around businessmen like that, to work with producers like that, engineers
yeah.
like that, it's just everything guys like us could have wanted was laid out on the table for us to feast on every day.
It was an incredible melting pot and just kindling, kindling, you know.
So, going back to what we were just talking about, songs. The other part of that is performances, and capturing
Right.
performances. So, a couple of years after I left Criteria, I'd worked with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young at Criteria on the record that was eventually came out just Stills Young. It was Long May You Run, and I worked with Don
Yeah.
Gaiman on that, and I
Right.
was full-fledged assistant on that one. And about, I think, a year and a half, 2 years later, I was working a Triad recording in Fort Lauderdale, and Neil
Wow.
Young just stumbled in the door and he goes, "Oh, hey man, I remember you from Criteria. You want to do a record?" And I went, "When?" He goes, "Now." And he went out to his car and started bringing in guitars. He found us in the phone book. He happened to be in Fort Lauderdale getting a boat renovated. So it was just by pure happenstance, but I could see he was happy. Oh, a familiar face, because he liked the comfort that
Yeah.
that brought. And like the second day we're in the studio, it was just Neil, myself, and my assistant. And Neil was just laying
Great.
stuff down on the acoustic guitar. And I'm sitting there going, I can't believe this. There's no producer, there's no band. And Neil is looking up at me through the glass going, "How did that one feel?" And yeah, I was like 22, 23 years old. Anyway, at
Sure.
some point, he came in the control room and he sees me turning an equalizer or setting a compressor. And he puts his hand on my shoulder and looks down at me because I'm sitting, and he goes, "Can I tell you something?" I said, "Yeah, of course." He goes, "You worry too much about getting sounds. You should worry more about getting great performances." And that was a profound, one of those profound
Yeah.
moments.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to share that story because I'm sure that you've had those moments working with Arif and Tommy. And Tommy, I think, was a master at like leaving a band to their own devices and only intervening when they needed intervention.
Yeah, I think Tommy used a lot of psychology
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of times, um, let's say you're recording vocals with a lead singer and you're doing a lot of punch-ins around. Oh, gee, they messed up that verse, and we got to go correct a piece of that verse or whatever. We're punching in, recording pieces of it, and from Tommy's point of view, it gets so introspective from a performer's point of view. That's all they're thinking about. So Tommy would do things like distract them.
Mm-hmm.
Let me change the subject so that they're not thinking about performing this song. They're off somewhere else. What do you like in your coffee? I mean, whatever whatever's going on, and it worked. A lot of times it worked. I mean, doing the Clapton stuff. I mean, because I worked on Layla as well. The
Right.
Dwayne Allman epic, and Tommy was brilliant in the sense that he would distract the band from thinking about it, which they would just play and not think. The problem is thinking. Don't think
Mm-hmm.
about it. Just perform. This is what you do. So, but you can't tell that to anybody.
Right.
You
Because then
can't.
they think
That's not
about
a. That's
that.
yeah. You can't, no, it's not good. So, you've got to say, what do you think of this lava rock in the corner? I mean, whatever the thing comes out of, nobody knows. But again, make the subject something other than singing this song or playing another guitar solo or whatever's going on. Just abstractly diffuse that psychic energy to somewhere else.
Were you able to apply any of the stuff that you learned from guys like Jerry Wexler or Tommy Dowd, working with Streisand, who, arguably one of the tougher vocalists to work with, I'm sure.
Well,
I mean, as far as you're sitting in the co-producer seat in the control room, and if you feel that she's not nailing the vibe, forget the notes. Just worry about the performance. Was it hard hitting the talk back button and getting her to?
Yeah, I mean, well, Albie took a little more direct approach. Like, why can't you sing it on the beat? But it was done in a friendly way.
Yeah.
I would say, when I stuck my 2 cents in, it was mostly about technology.
Yeah.
Barbara, how's your headphones? Do you like the balance? Do you like what you're hearing? Because it makes her comfortable if she's getting exactly what she wants. And because she wants what she wants, I mean, obviously. And so, what do you need those headphones? You like some little more strings? Yeah, Karl, getting some more strings. Whatever. Just so that, again, you're taking her mind off it. And so that, and Barry was always encouraging. That's great, Barbara. We might want to do it another time. Just, when you get to the bridge, just have a good time with it. Don't worry about your phrasing. So that we knew we already had the bridge, but we needed the second verse. So, you know what I mean? Like, don't think about anything up to there. So that there was always a way to deflect that sense of self. And Barbara was great because we caught her a couple of right times, because recording at that point was more like a hobby. Her real goal in life artistically was filmmaking. So, Star is Born and all that stuff. So, we just caught the spectrum at the right place. I mean, and Guilty, when I listen to the mix of Guilty, it's still one of the nicest, smoothest adult contemporary records we've ever made. I mean, it was so syncopated, and she was having a good time, and Barry was lilting, and it just has this kind of nice overall picture envelope, and it still does. When you listen to it
certainly
again.
Does. That record holds up. All those records hold up. Do you have a personal production philosophy, a sound, a vibe, taking you out of any work with Albie or Barry or anything in that world? If I were to come to you today with a band, what do you bring to the record? How do you approach it?
Because everybody's different. Everybody sees a different creation. I think technology should never get in the way of somebody's creation. It should be in the background. Technology is like, you're an artist and you don't really care where that shade of magenta came from.
You just know you want it.
You just really want it.
Yeah.
And so, but it'd be nice to have that shade when the artist is going to work. So technology should be a tool. Just like a lot of artists are obviously instrumentalists. They play piano or guitars in art, modern, You don't see a lot of cello songwriters. But the idea is, that's the expression of their music is part of that creation, and technology shouldn't get in the way. Technology should just help them. Gee, let's get a better guitar sound. What do you mean? Well, are you pleased with your guitar sound? Well, I don't know. You don't know. So let's try some alternatives. So, in other words, use technology as a helping hand, not as a limitation.
I'm a little jealous of the kids today. I know that you got into using Pro Tools years ago, crossed the digital divide. I have yet to ever do a Pro Tools session, just because I haven't engineered for years. Last thing I worked on in a real studio, I think, was in '97 maybe. So I just recently got Logic Pro, and I've made myself a promise that once this convention is over, I'm going to start learning how to use it. And just putzing around with it for a couple hours, I quickly realized something which goes exactly to what you're saying. Back in our day, if you ask Mike Panera, who had his own guitar sound, let's use another example, but if you ask a guitar player, are you happy with the guitar sound? He goes, no, I once had a guy, I think in Aldo Nova, said to me, I want more of a, bubble. Yeah. Great. Well, I don't have a bubble button anywhere on my console, but I'll figure out what that means and give it to you. Exactly. But we would send out for another amp. You would try another guitar. You would change the strings. You would change the microphone. You'd change the location of the amp and the microphone in the room. You would change the reverb. You change the EQ. All these things. Nowadays, you just go to a preset and it sounds like a friggin' bubble.
You hit the bubble preset.
So it's... On one hand, it's like, what a bunch of wussies. You guys didn't have to learn all this crap about physics that we did to change things. On the other hand, what they gain is speed and the moment moving faster. So if somebody wants to hear magenta, you can give them magenta in an instant. You don't have to spend 25 minutes finding magenta or creating magenta. So the creative process flows better.
Well, I think that's true in one sense. In the other sense, there used to be 25 choices. Now there's 2,000. So your artistic, skills may be diverted to making choices like that, rather than saying, "Boy, I really hear magenta." You know what I mean? So I don't know where that line really is, but I do know that a happy artist performs better, and a frustrated artist will never perform. Mm-hmm. So that asking them, what do you need to be comfortable and perform, is sort of a spiral that goes down. You might want to say, gee, that's great. What do we need? What do we need to incentivize an alternate feeling or an alternate take? Ask them. Get their feedback, because they're the one who created it. They started this thing as an artist. And I'm not in charge of changing their art. I'm in charge of getting the best art out of them. So what tools and tricks, boy, it sure depends on the person. It really, it's so personality driven, and no two humans are really the same. And I'm not the same as you. I mean, we're not. So I might ask a different question. But I think a lot of levels, it comes down to communication again. You have to find out what makes this tick. And the sooner we find out, it's great. Because a lot of times, I mean, that's, let me go back. Layla, that's why Layla was such a success. Because those two guitarists respected each other so much. And they really had some form of innate fear of, boy, this guy's really good. And so Tommy's genius was, let's put them together in the same room and see what happens.
Yeah.
And because all the Allman Brothers records that I've ever heard of, a lot of them in the early days, on the back of the record, it says produced by Tom Dowd.
Right.
And if you look back on the Cream, Disraeli Gears, that was recorded in New York City with Eric Clapton, I don't know when in the 60s, whatever it was. It was engineered by Tommy Dowd. And that was done in like 5 days in New York City. And so, you look back at their careers, and so Tommy was an integral part of, Duane Allman's career, as well as Eric Clapton's career. And so for him to pick up the phone and say, you guys need to play with each other. You mean that guy? You want me to? Oh, yeah, I want you in the studio together. Wow. So that lit up all the light bulbs they needed. Plus, Eric was coming off a very personal a couple situations, and he fell in love with Patty, and
Right.
that's the song's Layla. So, there's a whole story there, and so Tommy knew that and sensed it, and because he knew Eric, and so it's an amazing journey to have that artistic. What do you need? What do you really need? And ask. Be honest. I mean, I would never second guess somebody who writes a song. I said, what do you mean? The devil made me do it. I don't know. I don't know. I wasn't there. But there's communication again. It's all about how you ask, how somebody receives it. And I've been dead wrong a lot of times. I mean, I remember I was doing Greg Allman sometime in the studio. He goes, "You don't know how to make a damn Leslie," and he walks out of the studio.
Wow.
So I mean, yeah. So I mean, hey, okay, gave it my best shot. What am I supposed to do? But just stuff happens in the studio all the time, and you got to be ready for the wild card. But I know that over the years that getting along is better than not. And to me, that's what it's all about.
Goes back to that generosity thing as well.
Yeah.
We're all imbued with the criteria. It brings me to another little story about being a professional, I guess. I got a call one morning. Margie paged me and said, "Come to the office." So I went to the front office, and she said, "Karl's starting a record in Studio A with a band called Firefall." And she said, "I got to be honest with you.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, we don't think you're ready to be a full assistant yet." Thanks for the compliment, Margie. She said, but we can't find anybody else that wants to work on the record because the band's not famous. So would you go assist Karl? And I went, "Yeah, put me in, coach." So I go down to the room. My hands are sweating. I'm all excited. I walk up that little incline up to where you were sitting at the console, and I said, "What do you want me to do?" And you said, "Well, I started a little bit set up. It didn't get very far. Why don't you go finish setting the band up?" And I said, "Well, what do you want where?" And you said, "Well, you took my class because you used to teach the RIAA recording class at night at Criteria, which Mac told me if you want to work here, you got to take Karl's class." And it was awesome, by the way. So you looked at me with this wry little smile. You said, "You took my class. You know what to do, I hope." So I went out there and I set up the room, trying to remember. Let's see. He'd used the Sony 377 or 37P on a guitar amp. He'd used an 87 on acoustic. So I laid out the room. It was like 10, 20% done. I finished that room off and I came back in. I was scared to death. And I walk in there and I said, "How does it look?" Figuring you would give me a list of changes. And you said, "Did you set it up like I told you in class?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, and you said, "Then it's fine. Don't worry about it." It's like, whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I was just trying to get out of hard work. I mean, that's all it was. I didn't want to do all that again. And besides which, you needed that experience of gee, I wonder what it sounds like after I put all this stuff together.
Right.
And so, yeah. So I think that's probably part of it. I don't know. I think you learn as you go, because there is no real right way or wrong way. I mean, that was an amazing album experience, though, in a way. I'm trying to remember the name of the producer, Jim. He only produced that one record for Atlantic. I don't remember him doing anything else.
I can't believe I can't remember his name. Jim Mason. Great guy.
Yeah, great guy. And because he had flown out to Colorado and rehearsed the band for like almost 3 or 4 weeks, and said, "You guys are now ready to cut this record." And because they're all from the mountains, Colorado and all that. And but it all worked out. I mean, it really did. And Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, that was it.
Yeah.
Burnett. And they had written all these wonderful, right. "You Are the Woman." I mean, and they became like pop anthems for a little while there. I mean, And I was set to do the second Firefall album, and what happened? The Bee Gees. Oh, we're going to do an album in France.
Oh,
Something about dance.
like you should be dancing.
Yeah. Could it be Saturday Night Fever? Yeah. But it was like the idea was I got along with the guys great. I mean, everybody had a ball. Rick Roberts and I were sort of chasing the same girl, but that's another story entirely. But it was competitive. I mean, that was what it was. But no, it was a lot of fun, and thank you for helping me because
Man,
I don't.
I love that.
I mean, there was a lot of scurrying around, moving mics, and doing all the grunt work of existing.
Yeah.
And labeling tapes and all that stuff that goes with the gig. And you did a great job. I mean, it was like smooth as glass. So I never had an issue with it.
Well, I had a great coach, number one. And number two, there was a moment very early on the first day when they first started running down the rhythm track for the first song, which happened to be You Are the Woman. And Jim Mason was out in the room wearing headphones, kind of conducting the band, helping them find the groove, the pocket.
Sure.
And I walked back in the control room, and I'm standing over there kind of by the door, still on the incline. And I look over at you, and I said, that's a hit song.
Yeah.
And you said, I actually made a note about this. I want to,
Wow.
Again, well, I owe you so much, Karl. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to thank you. But let's see.
I'm 20 pounds heavier and in my 70s. What can I say?
So you said to me, I said, that sounds like a hit. And you turned around, looked over your shoulder at me, kind of this kindly mentor-like smile on your face, and you said, this is an exact quote. You said, you might be right, but it's not your place to say that here. Keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, and keep your opinions to yourself. And you probably, cool. Again, another piece of deep wisdom. So I'm passing that on to all you who are watching this thing. Just because you have an opinion doesn't mean it's always the right time or the right place. I was the assistant engineer. My job was to make sure the setup was good, make sure tapes didn't get lost, make sure takes didn't get lost. Jim Mason had a moment where he turned around, he looked over his shoulder at me. He was sitting at the producer's desk next to you. And he looks over his shoulder, gives me one of these. And he looks again. And he goes, come here. And I walk over and he goes, I'm the producer, right? I went, yeah. You're the assistant engineer, right? I said, yeah. He goes, okay, when I turn around like this, it means that I either need a razor blade, a straw, a joint, a cigarette, a lighter, a grease pencil, a pen, or a piece of paper. You need to have all those things on your person at all times. And the next time I look over my shoulder, you need to go whoop and be standing right here next to me. The lessons were learned daily in that place. And I fear that today our community of fellow engineer, producer, brethren, and sisters that are all over the world, isolated in bedrooms and basement studios, and the only real connection they have, going back to your theme of connection and communication, they spend most of their time texting or going on a forum or watching YouTube videos about. They don't have that luxury of all of us together in a room teaching each other and learning from each other. And I kind of worry that some of the art and some of the magic has been lost because of that. I don't think there's any putting the genie back in the bottle. Do you have any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, we live in a different world. I mean, everybody's got multiple computers and phones, whatever. I mean, we just live someplace completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, I could see a day someday when they'll put a chip in your ear.
Yeah, I don't think we're that far away.
We won't download songs. We'll have them.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's once they interface digital engineering with biology, all bets are off. I mean, humanity becomes probably one of the losers. And once we started this engine, I don't think you're going to turn it off. I mean, when you think about it, it's just science moves on.
Yeah.
Humans, we're just victims of our own devices. And so, it's sad. I mean, I grew up during the Cold War. That was a product of humans and technology.
Yeah.
And they couldn't understand why they would build this bomb that would kill everybody. I mean, think about it. And so, we learned how to hide under our desks in case of atomic warfare.
That's right. Duck and cover, baby.
Mean, when you think about where we're headed or where we've gone, and the idea of getting together as humans and doing collaboration on just a music project is sort of, it's so old-fashioned. I mean, right now, if I write a song, I can hire a drummer in L.A. to put a drum track on it and send the track over the internet, and I'll push that over to the bass player in Louisiana, and all of a sudden, I've got an internet record, and sit in my bedroom in my underwear and record the vocal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how the world is. And so you can either accept it or reject it, but it's here. And it's not going to stop. The only difference is the separation is live performance. I was watching the Tube the other night, and this exquisite guitar, I hear this exquisite guitar. I got it on the big screen TV out the other end. Wow, that's got to be Joe Bonamassa. You familiar with Joe Bonamassa?
Yeah, of course.
Of course. It's brilliant, and blues and everything it's just exquisite musicianship. And I go to my wife, I go, man, Joe Bonamassa's ripping it in the other room. I got to go out. No, it was Stevie Ray Vaughan. And it was like an old video of Stevie at Austin City Limits. And man, he just passed away, right? So I sat there and watched all the pieces of information I could get because it was so precious. And the difference is live performance. Mm-hmm. You could sit around in a studio of your bedroom, do anything you want, get 1,000 plugins on Pro Tools, but go up on stage and compete with 75-year-old men called the Rolling Stones. I mean, you think about it. And that's where it meets the road. Because being able to perform live, especially with comrades, other players, ensemble, we can't do it now with the virus, but obviously that's the heartstrings of real music. Because when you hear it live, it's not the same. We all know that, and it's just one of those things where we need that information. We really need that information. I mean, I got a couple of local bands here in East Coast of Florida that I respect and hang out with, and if they're gigging at some piano bar or something, ale house, I'm going to go down there and listen, and have a good time. And but I can't do that. But that's where it's at. That's where the magic and really occurs. And recording is it's another way to archive it.
Right, capturing the moment.
Capturing the moment. And I talked about live recording, but that's part of it. And people enjoy that a lot. And we miss it. And it seems to me that that's the dividing line between a painting and a photograph. And, you can sit there with all your magentas and everything, and it's wonderful. Because I'm part of that. But when you go there live, it's like, whew, this is cool. And I think, that's the stimulus that all the young people need to focus and learn their craft and hone it, and it'll be back. Live music will be back, and so I'm really encouraged by that.
Yeah. I want to do one last. I want to give everybody like 5-10 minutes to ask a couple of questions, just because I promised them that I would. But I want to ask you, desert island gear. If you were getting shipped off to a desert island and you knew you could have a little home studio there, what's the one piece of gear or a couple pieces that you'd have to take with you?
Well, assuming you have super internet access.
Yeah, of course. It's a very special island.
Yes. St. Croix, actually, U.S. Virgin. I know. So I'm just having fun. But the idea is probably vocal microphones if you're going to have a person who sings, and probably guitars that stay in tune. I mean, I don't know. I think, I think there's a set of microphones. If I'm going to go on the road, probably European microphones like Schoeps and Neumann, and those kind of exquisite condenser microphones. So if somebody plays congas in a tree on the island, I can get it, and I would probably have a decent set of microphones and microphone preamps that go along with it. Just a good set of serious preamps, and Focusrite, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so that that anything can go digital, and hopefully we'll get up to 96K sampling, and people won't know the difference. And but I think some nice, cool speakers that have full frequency response that I can tell the difference, and headphones, and that's the usual gack. I mean, I don't think but I think the idea that I'm going to walk around with tape recorders is kind of, what's the point? I'm going to put it in a digital pipe.
And probably record the Little Mermaid with your Schoeps microphone, because she'll be on the island. Somebody in the chat room wants to know, do you have a single favorite analog console? SSL, Neve?
Well, I just mentioned Focusrite. I'm a real fan of those things. Because Rupert Neve, I think Neve gear, if you can get an ancient piece of Neve gear to shine and sparkle, it's probably got the right amount of harmonic distortion to sound really musical. That would be my favorite piece of gear, is a vintage Neve. That's got a lot of perspective. I mean, when you take a real microphone like a Neumann or a Schoeps or a Sennheiser and all these nice microphones, and you or even Shure microphones, for gosh sake, you put it through those transformers in the Neve, and you get enough ringing so when you translate it to digital and clocks, it's got some overtone series that is human.
Mm-hmm. How about I just saw a question here. I wanted to where'd it go? Keith LeBrand. How about in the digital side? What plugins put a smile on your face?
There's too many.
Yeah.
It's like Apple apps, How many? What's your favorite Apple app? I don't know. There's 40,000 of them. No, it depends on what you need at the moment. I think, decent equalization. Pick your own favorite EQ. Compression. Any of the modeling compressors like the Uri and all that stuff are really nice. And there's some new modern ones that come out where they're really adjustable, frequency dependent, and you can move it around. And so I think there's all that kind of stuff that I would play with. Harmonic generators, just all kind of cool. I mean, there's just too many plugins. But I'm not a big fan of pitching instruments.
Right. Melodyne or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, they're just I mean, it's okay if somebody gives a great performance and they just miss one note. Give me the plug-in. But if I got to do the whole sauce, it's like, why
Right, syllable by syllable. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see.
Somebody asked, how do you determine which mic is appropriate for a given singer? I already know how you're going to answer this, but go for it.
Yeah, I mean, have a collection of mics that you trust, maybe 4 or 5, and depending on your budget. I mean, a Neumann U87 or U67 or the modern version of it. The 67 was the tube, the 87 was the constant, capacity. But any of those Neumanns for vocals, Shure microphones make some really neat vocals. And AKG, obviously, the whole C series microphones. There's about 6 vocal microphones that I could probably make a list of if I was headed for a desert island, but because we rent those things now. But I would say, about 5 or 6, and have the singer try them.
Yeah,
what do they sound like?
Right. The answer is which one sounds best. That's how you pick it.
Mean, I've done that. I've done that many times because, I mean, the one thing about the Gibbs, I used a U87 in cardioid on all 3 singers on one microphone to get that blend. Yeah. not Omni, cardioid.
Right. That's funny. You were actually the person that taught me the value of Omni. You once told me it was the most underused, underappreciated pattern, and that it sounded much richer, but people rarely used it.
Because you got to watch out for the acoustics. The acoustics of the room,
Yeah, you have to be a real engineer, somebody who can combine artistry, physics, and electronics at a pretty high level to be able to do that kind of stuff. I'm looking. Somebody asked. Hopefully, I'm getting this right. Who do you like out there today? Whose records do you listen to? And go, man, I'd love to work with that artist.
Lady Gaga, I like a lot.
Totally agree.
There's a couple of them. I mean, I wish I had a list for you, but I think her approach is kind of down my where I would be. There's a plethora of artists, and I don't want to. I wouldn't narrow it down to Karl's favorite. I think that's hard to do. I mean, like I said, I just spent the day listening to Stevie Ray Vaughan. I can't delineate, because it's like you hear this and you hear that and you hear this and you hear that. And there's, God, that was good. And who was that? Oh yeah,
right.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, and Spotify makes it such that there is so much of it out there that's not when we would go buy, Stevie Wonder album and play it over and over. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you'd shred a Jimi Hendrix record. I mean, that was it. You'd listen to it over and over again. So I don't know.
Well, you said, I don't know if I can do 2 hours. Well, you just did, and it was incredible.
I have something to wet my whistle.
There you go. Any final thoughts for anybody watching that wants to grow up? You've already touched on this, but is there, a closing thought for people who have the passion that you had or have, and that I got, we all share this passion. What should a 19-year-old kid in today's world do with that? How do they make it happen?
Well, I think the first thing is a little bit of luck, because you got to be able to smell it when opportunity knocks. And you just said the same thing. If you hear that knock and you can open that door, go for it, because that's it. I mean, depending on your education and what you want to do, have the confidence that you can move forward. like you mentioned confidence a lot. You felt like, boy, I was scared of this and scared of that and scared of that, but you persevered. And you ended up with a great career in the music industry. And it's not about songwriting, or it's not about anything. It's about business in this case. Well, as a go-between, and so, which is a needed part of the industry, so that there's a niche for everybody. But when you hear that opportunity, pursue it. Don't ignore it. Don't think your value, your self-value, what you're worth, because after a while, you could be selling retail for the rest of your life. You know what I mean? There's careers that, you'll find your niche, whatever it is. I mean, if you play an instrument, obviously, and you write songs, then that's where you want to improve. You want to get to the point where you're confident in that. You can play it for people. You do it on stage at the local club. You know that you have that in you, and hone your craft. A lot of it's just like a craft. I mean, I asked Barry Gibb one day, where do the songs come from? He goes, it's a well. He goes, I just reached down in the well and there they are. So he's honed his craft. And songwriting is a craft as well as it just stabbing at ether. You have to know this is what you want to do and do it. And nobody gets to hear the stuff that didn't work.
Oh man, that's a bumper sticker right there. Karl, seriously, I can never ever thank you enough. And thank you for doing this, man, and just sharing who you are and the stuff that's inside of you that I was witness to. Thank you for being generous once again and sharing it with everybody here.
You're welcome.
Deb and I,
I'm looking at the laptop. I'm a little orange. Oh, no, actually pinkish orange. I don't know if that's the lighting or my camera. But
I don't know. I'll send it out for color correction.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll send you a link to this, and just thanks, man. It was great hanging out with you.
Yeah, Michael. Say hello to Los Angeles. And,
I will.
Stay safe.
Deb and I, as soon as it's COVID is over, Deb and I are coming out to Florida, so I'll give you a call and we'll go out and grab a dinner one night, and our wives can meet. Cool. Okay. All right.
Yeah, man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Karl Richardson. See you, Karl.